Welcome to the first of two screencasts looking at essay writing for AS and A-level sociology. Now there are three main types of longer essay questions that you will encounter in your sociology exams. Firstly, there are questions that ask you to evaluate a claim. Secondly, there are questions that ask you to evaluate a specific theory. And thirdly, there are questions that ask you to evaluate sociological explanations. That means evaluate a range of theoretical explanations. And in this screencast, we're going to focus on the first type of longer essay question, these ones that ask you to evaluate a claim. And then in the next screencast, we'll look at these other types of essay questions. And notice that the key skill with all of these types of essay questions is the skill of evaluation. So this requires you to write an essay that is genuinely critical and involves testing the strengths and weaknesses of sociological explanations. So you're effectively making an argument on the pros and cons of a particular viewpoint or a particular theory, weighing them up in light of the coherence of the argument or the strength of the evidence presented. And what you can see revealed at the bottom of the slide at the moment are the command words that examiners will use when they want you to display the skill of evaluation. So obviously evaluate, but also command words like assess, discuss, or to what extent. So the first type of longer essay question that you might encounter on a sociology exam paper is a question that asks you to evaluate a claim. So typically these are questions that are going to ask you to either evaluate, assess, or discuss a view, or ask you to what extent you agree with a particular view. And with this type of question, I recommend that you adopt a four-part essay structure. And essay structures are really important because it helps the person who marks the essay to understand what is going on, whereas by contrast a list of unconnected ideas and examples is likely to confuse and will certainly fail to impress the examiner. One way of visually representing this four-part essay structure is to imagine your essay question being structured like an X-ray picture of a fish. So part one of the essay structure is represented by the head of the fish, that's your introduction. Parts 2 and 3 are represented by the two sets of bones that represent both the arguments for the claim and the arguments against the claim. And then the fourth part of the essay is represented by the tail, that's your conclusion. And the spine is just a reminder to make sure that you link each of your main points back to the question set. So the first stage of this four-part essay structure is to write a good introduction. And a good introduction should contain the following elements. So firstly, you need to identify the subject of the essay and define key terms. And the easiest way of identifying the subject of the essay is to refer back to the question. So rephrase the question in your own words. Secondly, you need to highlight any major debates that lie behind the question. So it's frequently the case that the question will index a wider sociological debate and want you to engage with this. So read the question really carefully and think about whether or not there's a sociological debate that lies behind the question. And then finally, a good introduction should signpost the essay's key argument. So you should identify the sequence and shape of the argument that you're going to develop in your essay. So to summarise, make a bold, clear start, acknowledge that you've read, understood, and are going to respond to the question set, and highlight a key debate, if there is one, lying behind the question. If you find writing introductory paragraphs difficult, then what I would recommend is practice using the following templates, the following words and phrases to help you structure your opening paragraph. What you can see on the screen at the moment is an example of an introduction to this particular essay, which is from the World Sociology topic. So evaluate the view that aid cannot solve the problems of the developing world. We can see here that the first sentence clearly identifies the subject of the essay by rephrasing the question, and then the rest of this introductory paragraph clearly identifies and signposts the shape of the arguments that are going to be discussed in the main body of the essay. Now, I did mention the importance of defining key terms in the introduction, and the key term in this essay is obviously the term aid. However, it may be that this definition or outline will require several sentences and will therefore look overlong and clumsy if it's included with the rest of your introduction. So in consequence, you might decide that it's more appropriate to allot a section of its own, perhaps immediately after the introduction, to really define what we mean by aid and to unpack this concept fully. So once you've shown that you really understand the claim through the introduction, you then need to move on to the main body of the essay, where you're going to be assessing the arguments and evidence in support of the claim, and also the arguments and evidence that go against the claim. And to maximise your mark in this section of your answer, it's a good idea to try to construct paragraphs based on this peel approach, which we'll look at in a moment. And going back to the X-ray picture of the fish that we started with, sections 2 and 3 of your essay are represented by the two sets of bones. So in other words, in section 2 of your answer, you need to give arguments and evidence in support of the position or viewpoint that's stated in the question, and then in section 3 of your answer, you need to give arguments and evidence that go against question or show limitations of the position or view that is stated in the question. Now, you may want to adapt this basic format slightly. So for example, rather than exploring all of the arguments that are for the claim in the second part of your essay and all the arguments against the claim in the third part of the essay, you could of course explore one point that's in favour of the claim and then immediately contrast it with a parallel point that is against this particular position. So think about whether or not this clarifies or confuses your answer, because you need to decide how best to structure the argument in light of the question asked and the material used to answer it. Now, a moment ago I talked about an effective way of structuring your paragraphs within sections 2 and 3 of this 4-part essay structure, and this approach is known as the peel approach. So the P is a reminder that you need to make one key point per paragraph, and this is the key to making this particular approach work, and this is only effective if you firstly plan the key points that you're going to make in your essay and the examples that you're going to use to support your points. So you need to start each new paragraph by stating the point that you're going to be making. So going back to this essay on aid, we would need to plan in advance the main points that we would use to support the view that aid cannot solve the problems of the developing world. So each of these points would need to be developed into a paragraph. And of course we would also need to plan in advance the main points that we're going to use to argue against the claim in the question. And then the next stage in this peel approach to paragraphing is to make sure that you develop and explain the point that you've identified fully. And when you're doing this, it's really important in sociology to always back up your point with evidence. So you've stated your point, you've explained it, but you've got to back it up with evidence from research studies and or theoretical arguments. And then wherever possible, always try to evaluate the point that you've made in your paragraph. For example, you might want to include some specific criticisms of the evidence or theoretical arguments that you've used in the paragraph. So for example, you can evaluate the evidence that you've used in your paragraph in terms of its validity, its reliability, and its representativeness, and you can evaluate the quality of the theoretical arguments that you've outlined in your paragraph by looking at their coherence. In other words, is there a logic to the argument or claim, or are there inconsistencies or flaws in the argument, or the concepts used, or the assumptions behind the argument? And what you can see on the screen at the moment are useful words and phrases that will signpost to the examiner your use of evaluation. And then the final part of the Peel approach to paragraphing is to remember that as you discuss a piece of evidence or a theoretical argument, to link it directly to the question set. And going back to the essay question that we've been looking at on the effectiveness of aid, here's an example of a paragraph that's based on the Peel approach. So we've got the point clearly identified at the beginning of the paragraph. That's then explained and developed and linked to some evidence and some examples. There's a clear link back to the question, and also there's some evaluation. So hit the pause button, have a read through the paragraph so that you can see how it's constructed using this Peel approach. And here's another paragraph from the same essay using this paragraph structure. So hit the pause button and have a look at how this is constructed using the Peel approach. Now, when you're writing up your main arguments for and against the claim, make sure that you use link or transition words, phrases and sentences to help make your essay flow. In other words, using these types of words and phrases will make your essay easy to read by relating sentences, parts of sentences and paragraphs to each other. Without the use of these types of linked words and phrases, your essay will read like a list of unrelated points or something that's been written in note form. Now, the final stage of this four-part essay structure is the conclusion. And this is represented by the tail of the X-ray picture of the fish that we've been using to visualize this essay structure. And the primary job of a conclusion is to provide a final condensed version of the essay's core argument. Or put simply, a conclusion should leave the reader with a clear impression of your argument, what it was about, what you believe, and why you believe this. And if you find writing conclusions difficult, then what I would suggest is using this particular template to help you practice writing conclusions. What you can see on the screen at the moment is a conclusion to the essay on aid that we've been looking at. And if you hit the pause button in a moment, you should be able to see that this conclusion makes use of the template for writing conclusions that I showed you on the previous slide. And what you can see on this slide are examples of essay questions that are asking you to evaluate a sociological claim. So you can see that this type of question is very common and can be found in all of the AS and A2 units.